Well, good evening, YouTubers, fellow reloaders, fellow collectors, fellow restorers, restoration folk. This video, not meant to be about the Craftsman 100 table saw, but it will be about part of the Craftsman 100 table saw. So you may recall a few vids ago where I picked up the blade guard, which in its complete form with all of its pieces and even the insert is kind of like unobtainium. So for collection and historical purposes, this is amazing. For practical use, not so much. And I think I talked about this before, because the way it sits on the bench is, on the table saw is, this clamps into a portion behind the actual blade. So essentially what this is, right here, is a riving knife. And then these are your paws, your kickback paws. So again, very cool. So a riving knife before the invention of a riving knife, or in some cases, again, riving knife, riving knife, riving knife. So you see here's the blade, and you know where these come, you know, a little farther up, this does not move up or down with the blade on the table saw. So this is mounted permanently like this. It actually sits up about this much from the table, which I don't like, because then there's the potential for issues there. And then as the wood lifts it, it grabs it in the paws, keep it from kicking back. So again, I'm not going to install this on my Craftsman 100, but I did like the idea because my particular cradle has the hardware to lock this in, which none of my other Craftsman 100s had the hardware, which is essentially, you know, a screw with some washers and some other metal pieces, which I'll either show a picture of right about here, or insert a video, or maybe do a separate video. So the idea that I wanted to implement was something like that, you know, essentially a riving knife. So let me move this out of the way. So what I came up with was an idea, which I have over here. And that was tracing most of that particular item to make this particular template. I don't know if with the lighting, if this is getting picked up or not. So this, especially when you look at the cost of riving knives, this is a reverse image of that. So flip this around, and that's kind of what I'm going after, without spending the ridiculous amount of money that our rainforest folks are asking for. Riving knives were a big deal, and I think now they're being replaced by splitters and zero inserts. So I'm not going to do a zero insert for my woodworking needs, but I like the idea of the splitter. The splitter essentially serves the same purpose as the riving knife. It splits the wood just as the riving knife does. Only I have a metal insert, so I don't have the room to put splitters on my metal insert, nor would I. So that brings me back to potentially a riving knife solution. Now, where the riving knife, people make a big deal, oh, your riving knife doesn't, you know, go up or down with the blade. Well, neither do the splitters. The splitters are one size. So essentially, the splitters are a mini riving knife, or a stationary riving knife, kind of like this concept. So I'm going to start with this, and I will pull it all the way out. And I may end up just making a short mini version of this that mounts onto the back of the cradle, still in the insert, but only smaller, or maybe cut this to replicate this. So I'm going to start with a riving knife of this shape, but I may end up with a riving knife the size of the splitters, as opposed to a large riving knife like these. So that brings us to our package that was late as hell, as usual. So I found another arbor wrench, and instead of bluing, this was a little beat up, but instead of bluing, I decided to clean it up, sand it, steel wool it, and then coat it with what I usually use for brass lacquer to keep it from rusting. So I thought that turned out really nice, and I'm going to hang this on my CM100. All right, let's have a little sip of tea. Does the body good. And let me open this bag. So I wanted to buy this locally, but it is becoming harder and harder to get local shops business / money because they don't carry stuff. So my big box shops did not have a plate, so I was looking for the size. I measured the size of, or rather the thickness. This is 2 millimeter, and most of my 10-inch blades are just at or slightly under 2 millimeter. So I thought, or just over 2 millimeter rather, so I thought I would do a 2 millimeter piece of steel. And that's what this is. 304 stainless steel plate, 8 by 8 inches, thickness 0.08 or 2 millimeter. Which you can't read, but that's of no importance. All right, let's unbag this. Can't cut steel, not with scissors at least. See what this steel plate looks like. Oh, quite nice. That will be a very sturdy version of what I'm trying to do. So I went with 8 by 8 because this, from this corner to here, is 7 by 7, if memory serves, or so. So I wanted something, or I looked for a plate that was at least 7 inches, so I stand corrected. I'm at 5 and almost 3/4. And the original was at 4. I'm going to take it out to 6 or so. So when you think about that, I will trace, I'll cut this template out. I'll use the back here as one of my edges, as well as one of my tops. So it looks like I'm going to do something like this, which still leaves me with plenty of steel to go with another version of that, or maybe implement something like this, but using a base comparable to the size that I need it to be. This would be too big, so I need it to be this size, which is approximately 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, just shy of ½ an inch, and my pencil might be a little long, and this one's a 1/4 inch. So roughly a ½ inch, roughly a 1/4 inch, total being 1.5 inches, and then obviously the gap. So this weekend's project, because this was so late in arriving, is going to be creating initially a riving knife, seeing if that fits or meets my needs, and then potentially either shaving that down or creating an extra steel, the equivalent of a micro insert. Good stuff. This came out beautiful. I have high hopes for this. I will be using my bandsaw that cuts metal. I should have no problem with this whatsoever. And then we'll see how that turns out. So more to come when it's light outside and I can start doing this activity. So see you soon. As promised, here is, I don't know if you can get a better view. Not really. So it's a little contraption. Looks like a little mini vise. You just loosen this nut a little bit and slide the little horseshoe shape into there. and that goes essentially, it's the equivalent of being about right there, which is where a splitter would be. So this is either going to house a splitter or my homemade riving knife. Good day, YouTubers. So we have our template. We have transferred our template to our steel. So this will be the first attempt, and I did raise the blade up, and this does not, this particular template does not interfere with the blade. So the blade has more than almost a ½ inch, I would say, of clearance. So this will work in theory. And I checked how low this has to sit. So this actually mounts to where this line is level with the top of that little contraption that I showed you inside the cradle. And my second idea, since I'll be cutting, is to cut this out, which is essentially, or basically, a short version of that. And whether this retains this curve or not, or just goes straight up like a little splitter, straight up and round it off like the splitter, I may take that approach. Or I may cut a third, and maybe one of these corners becomes the splitter shape. So I'll be back when I'm done cutting. We are back, and we now have 3 riving knife and 2 splitters. I would say that per the template, the knife came out, number 1 came out pretty good, number 2 came out nice, and number 3. So I think I was debating whether I'm going to sand these, but because of getting in here, edges have all been ground down, everything's been rounded. It will benefit from a fine sanding. So, especially in here. So I was debating whether I was going to need to do that, and the answer is yes. So let's peel off all of our plastics. It's a shame too, because the finish is gorgeous. So you can see the roughness from all of my activity. Did this even have a cover? You know, I don't know if this was a cover or if this was the bare metal. Let me get the original. You know, I don't think, actually, is it a cover or not? Let me take off my bionic glasses. You know, I don't think this is a cover. I don't think there's a plastic. I think there's just this. I put my glasses back on. A thin. This is beautiful, beautiful stainless. It's too bad I have to sand it. Maybe I'll put a grain on it. Yeah, that's just too rough on that side. Smooth. Yeah, I don't think, well, we're going to find out when I sand it. So we will be back. 1, 2. Let's take off number 2. Yeah, that's the, wow, that's just gorgeous. Gorgeous grain. All right, we will hit these with the sander and be back and see what they look like in a few minutes. We are close to the finish line. So we had an idea. Riving knife, splitter. I bought a piece of stainless steel. Made a template. That template turned into 3 ideas, which are beautifully smooth, no sharp edges. One could make a argument that that's sharp. I mean, if you stab someone, yeah, but in terms of, you know, poking sharp, not bad. That was the original idea, and as I was doing the idea, or as I was thinking of the idea and coming up with alternatives, I do like the whole splitter idea. Call that a modified version, you know, shorty riving knife. Since I was doing this essentially the same effort with the same set of tools, the bandsaw, sanding, grinding, you know, whatever, doing 3 at once was negligible, because the amount of effort to do everything once and to do it 2 more times with smaller pieces of steel made it very easy. So these are now sanded and coated, lacquer coated, kind of like I did with the arbor wrench, so you don't get a gazillion fingerprints all over them. And now we're going to mount each one and see. I don't even know if they fit. If they don't fit, it's going to be a short day, and I'm going to move on to something else, maybe go to the range. But we'll give it a try and see if they fit. Here we have idea number 1, which, when the blade is in its upright, most highest 3.5 inch position, looks great. And that's relatively solid. It's not cranked down, because I have to do this 2 more times. And quite frankly, that little screw, which is a Phillips flathead, and you can't get a screwdriver in there, it's just a little bit of a bitch. There are 2 very thin flat washers. This is almost perfectly the size of the blade. Removing the 2 flat washers, or one of the flat washers, will bring this perfectly centered on the blade, so that everything matches. So as you can see, in its highest position, looks good. Problem is just that, in its highest position. My cuts would be probably between here and here-ish. That's a pretty big, stable, unmovable riving knife for that particular position. So let's go to option number 2, back momentarily. Here we have option number 2. And by the way, option number 2 and option 3 are basically the same height, at least right now they are. And the only difference being the degree of the angle. And I'm sure somebody will say, well, what does it look like with the blade insert on? And that's what it looks like with the blade insert on. So again, for nominal cuts, here, here, and we'll throw it all the way up. And again, I didn't take the washers out to perfectly line up with the blade, but it's pretty darn close. All right, option 3 in a second. This is option 3. And these are the very thin shims that I didn't measure. I took them out, and we have perfect blade thickness match. And this is what the blade looks like at its height. And I will take the camera off tripod here in a minute and show you what this looks like. As I try not to get cut. So that is what it looks like at its height, at its highest height. And again, I mean, it's bendable just like the blade is movable, but again, it'll be as good as those plastic splitters. So I could chop this down, but me thinks that that's probably an equitable height, all things considered. So I think that's going to be the winner. And let me go ahead and take the camera off the tripod so you can see what that looks like in its permanent home. Okay, so it's sandwiched. There's a screw with a lock washer, a Phillips head, a straight slot, which is kind of interesting. I wish it was not, but it's essentially just a little clamp. And this is the first saw I've seen this on. So with that clamp, we now have a splitter, a 2023 splitter for a 1957 table saw, and the clearance is perfect, and it matches up with the blade, which let me pull this up a little bit. And I will go grab a straight edge, so I'll be right. All right, there's my washers. There's my straight edge. Same amount of clearance. So we are, I'm going to call it good homemade splitter. That's it for this morning. Off to the range. As I know somebody will ask, so we're going to end today's build with a will it work video segment. So I've got a scrappy piece of wood. I'm going to cut off this end, then flip it over and cut off this chunky ass end. And again, we'll see if it works. And I will move the fence to the other side. All right. Here we go. That is a really nice cut. And we're going to flip it over and try the other side. I don't know if I saw a little wiggle. Might be a camera thing, might be a positioning thing, but again, that's a nice cut. So we will flip things over. Yeah, that is not going to work, so we will do Mr. by hand again, just to see what's going on. And is that a good angle? Yeah, I'll leave it at this angle. All right, so I think what I saw was a little bit of catch. So it looks like we had a little bit of burn. So it looks like this needs to come over just a tad, so I might be bending and experimenting. But I will say, again, depending on which pieces are being kept, this was a lot cleaner than this side in terms of the burn. So I'll say maybe, I'm sure somebody will comment, but the cuts on the, depending on which is the keeper and which is not, look great. Maybe having it sit there towards the end, because that's where the burn was, as opposed to just pushing it through. All right, now I get to clean up some redwood sawdust. I'm gonna say windage. Again, may fine-tune this in terms of either a bend, a tap, or looks like on this side, because it might be a little bit thicker than the blade, a little better on this side cutting than on this side. But I will experiment. I'm still going to say win in terms of good day, YouTubers. We'll put a final spin on my splitter, because I just cut this. We're going to call this kerf. I just cut this with the blade this high. Saw is currently unplugged. You can't quite see it, but it's unplugged. So I'm going to leave this up right here and do two things. One, I'm going to measure the blade, and then I'm going to measure the actual tip, because I don't know if I'll be able to get in there and measure that accurately. So I'm going to zero my calipers out. I'm at millimeters right now, and I'm going to try and take and the camera's in the way, so this isn't a comfortable thing. So we have I'm going to say point, you know, again, maybe 183, I'm going to go with 18. Funny how that just keeps moving. I'm going to go with 0.183 as the blade thickness. And I'm going to go with 0.249 to 0.250. 0.250-ish. 0.248. I can't get a good... trying to get it right on. So at its widest point, it seems like I'm at 0.271 for the width of the actual tip. And for this splitter, I'm at 1.92. So in theory, depending on how this splitter is adjusted either this way or that way, it should compensate for this blade of 0.183, 184, and this tip of 0.245. So I'm going to lower this, leave the fence as is. We need a little WD-40, a little oil. And if this was still cutting, so we have a slight hit, and you can probably see that the hit is because, again, no washer, and I don't want to bend, but it's just a hair. So the issue is not the thickness of the splitter. So the splitter doesn't need to be altered in terms of its thickness, but you can see that it's potentially off just a hair. But if I switch this over, I think we're done with the calipers. I'll put those away. Alright, so if we move the fence to the other side, and repeat said cut, I'll just get the blade up. So that we're, okay, so I would say that is legit. Put the blade down. And let's see what we've got for our splitter. Also. Alright, so now Time for a little magic. Golden. Now we're done.